Allie.
Hello, Melissa. Welcome to Liverpool, USA, a best friend podcast because we're best friends.
Yeah.
Um, Today we're talking about what?
Books.
Books.
Yeah. More
We like,
specifically, our 2023 book update, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
we'll kind of do like a little, we're like almost halfway through the year.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so we thought we'd do like a little book update, what we've been up to with our reading so far this year. And I also thought it would be fun to just kind of talk about reading in general because I don't think we've really talked that much about it, but you know, what our like reading routines are like, what how we document what we read, how we choose books to read, like that kind of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Totally.
So, yeah, I guess we can just start with have you been reading this year?
I have been reading just a little bit. Um
Mhm.
w- yeah, I've been wanting to read more, of course.
Mhm.
And it's like I'm the type of person that, like, when I was a kid, I was reading constantly. Like, I was like
Yeah.
reading in classes that I wasn't supposed to be reading books. Like, I was that kind of kid. Um
Yeah.
and then I feel like it's directly correlated, my like how much I read books with when I got a smartphone. But we won't, that's a whole nother conversation we can so I won't go too much into
Yeah.
that. But basically,
Yeah.
I for the past, a long time now, I haven't been reading as much as I would like. But I've been trying uh more recently. So, like, this year I've only finished 4 books, but it's 4 books, so like that's good, for me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's like almost like a book a month. Like that's pretty good, I think.
Yeah. I started
Yeah.
there's one like one or two that were started at the very end of last year. But I
Mm,
finished them this year, so I'm counting them as like,
counts.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that definitely counts. So, would you say like do you read a little bit every day or do you find like sometimes you're just in the mood and you like sit down and you read like a bunch of a book?
Yeah. I try to read. Well, what I got pretty good at, like, a little bit last year, was reading at night before I go to bed instead of being on my
Mm,
phone.
yeah.
And that's like the prime reading time, which I used to do growing up. Like, I used to, like, all throughout like high school and everything, that was like my like routine. And
Mhm.
so it's what I've been doing for a long time. But of course, in the past years I haven't been so much. But that's what I try to do, like that. If I'm
Mm.
reading, that's like usually the time that I do it. I'm not super good at doing it just like in the middle of the day. I
Yeah.
would love to do that more often, of course, which I'll just say like over and over again in this podcast, because I have
Yeah.
like an issue with doing, being on my phone instead of doing literally anything else. Um, but yeah, usually, I guess that's like the shorter answer is usually, if I am, it's like at the end of the night. And recently it's only been like a few times per week, maybe, but I'm trying to make it be like every night.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What about you? Because you obviously finish a lot of books compared to me. You read a
Yeah.
lot. And so, like, are
Yeah.
you just reading like in the middle of the day, or what? Like, when do you read?
So I read pretty much every single day on my lunch.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
reading during my lunch.
Yeah. I was doing
Um,
that for a while, like on my Kindle app, cuz
mhm,
for whatever reason, and maybe with my new job, I can like get into a different routine, but I was trying to with my old job. And then I would like read like my Kindle app, like a book that I've been reading forever on and off on there. But
mhm,
I would love to do that like on my lunches at work too. Yeah.
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 Yeah, so like on my breaks at work and on my lunch at work. And I get an hour long lunch at work and so I
Oh.
I feel like it's a pretty like I'm
Mhm.
able to actually like get into the book like it doesn't feel like rushed, you know?
Mhm. Yeah.
And I usually pack my lunch, like I usually don't go out and get something. So it's like a very, I kind of have my routine. I like get into the break room, I like start heating up my food or whatever, get my book out and like just read for like an hour at lunch. And then in the evenings I read, not like right before bed. I almost never read like in bed, like right before I fall asleep. I would maybe prefer to do that because I do go on my phone right before bed, which is probably horrible for my brain. But I usually don't read right before bed. I read like in the evening, like before I go to bed, if that makes
Mm.
sense, like before I
Yeah.
get in bed.
Yeah.
Like I sometimes watch TV, but I don't usually watch TV. Usually what I'm doing is like reading my book like in the evening, like after dinner or whatever before bed. Um so that's kind of when I read, and then I read a ton on the weekends. Like usually what I'm doing on like Sunday is reading my book for half the day. Um and yeah, I also really enjoy going to like coffee shops or bars or like places like that by myself with my book and like sitting and having a little fun beverage or like a little snack or like whatever and reading my book and like kind of people watching but also reading my book, you know. That is
Which
like
seems
a
like easy to do in Bellingham. You have like cute places
yes.
there that I feel like you can go do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I find that I do that a lot, like in the evenings or like on the weekends or whatever. It's like, oh, let me like go to this cute little like breakfasty place and I'll just go by myself and like read my book. Or sometimes even I go with Abe and like I just read my book and he does whatever he's doing, you know, and we just kind of like hang out together. Or yeah, I go to the like this is very like manic pixie dream girl of me, but like
Yeah.
I go to bars by myself and like sit at the bar and like read a book. And
Yeah.
it's like such a good time. Like it's like the perfect establishment
Yeah,
to
is
like read a
it?
book at.
Because I don't know
Yes.
if I've ever seen anybody reading a book in a bar. It's like a funny visual to
Mhm.
me. I also don't go
Yeah,
to a lot of
I
bars, obviously,
yeah,
but you know.
that's yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like kind of perfect because I really like reading when there's like kind of stuff going on around me a bit. Um like it actually helps me focus, I think.
That's really
So,
interesting. Yeah. I feel
yeah,
like
so I
that's
really like
opposite of what someone would usually be like, you know? They're like, "Oh, I
yeah,
have to be like in a quiet
yeah,
room." Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, anyways, that's I read basically any like blank space I have in my day, I'm usually reading during it.
Which is so good and
Um
so healthy. Like you're describing this and I'm like, "Oh my god, she's you're like you're doing good. You're doing good. At least like in that part of your life, like I feel like you have that figured out. You know what I mean? Like
you.
you sound like you have it really figured out cuz you're like, "Yeah, I'm reading instead of doing whatever." And I'm like, "Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Goals.
Well,
Yeah.
I want to, and I wanted to talk about this
Yeah.
on the podcast, but I didn't always used to be like this.
Yeah.
Um in college, I really did not read. Like because
mm.
I was also the same as you. Like as a kid, I was reading constantly, and
Mhm.
then is about the time I got an iPhone, I was like, okay, no more reading, only be on your phone. And
Yeah.
like I was getting really into like watching a lot of like TV and like YouTube and like all this stuff.
Mhm.
Which like to be clear, there's nothing like wrong with that. It's
Mhm.
just that like when you do it for too much of your day, it like eats your brain.
For sure. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and so I was like about mid college, like end of college ish, I realized that I really didn't like that. And I was like, okay, I have to like do something. And I kind of made a pretty like drastic, like it was a choice. Like I was like, okay, I have to do something. I'm gonna like kind of set a boundary and like this is gonna be the new rules is I'm gonna read um for 1 hour on Sundays, no matter what. I was literally
Oh,
like, okay,
okay.
on Sunday, no
Yeah.
matter what, 1 hour, that is like non-negotiable. And also I was like, okay, and also I'm gonna stop watching TV for a little while. Like because I'm just watching and like YouTube and I'm kind of including
Mhm.
all of that. But
Yeah.
like I was like, whenever I want to watch TV and like I would be watching TV, I'm gonna read a book instead. Or like I don't have to if I really don't want to, but I'm also not gonna watch TV. You know, like I could find something else to do.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
like I'm not gonna watch TV because I need a little healthy break from TV. So I just for like 6 months literally did not watch TV at all. And made it so that I had to read for an hour on Sundays no matter what. And I think this was like junior year of college that I did this. Um, but I basically was like, okay, the only way I'm gonna like get back to reading is if I like make it so I have to. And then I really do think like reading is a habit, you know, like you have to like get in the habit of just like picking up a book. And so I just like forced myself to like create the habit. And then after 6 months, it was like really easy because it was like, oh, I just like want to read instead of watch TV or like whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Or I just like want to read on Sundays, and like I would start reading for an hour, but then I would read for 3 hours instead or whatever. Um, and so then after that, then it was like more of a habit. And then since, yeah, I would say like 2019 was the first year that I like tracked my reading more. Like I like kept track of which books I was reading.
Mm-hmm.
And like that was when I like started being like, no, you have to read on Sundays, like blah blah blah. Um, since then I've read a decent amount of books every year and like kept track. 2022, last year was the least I've read since starting that in like 2019. And I still read I think like 19 books or something last year, but that was the least I've read in the last like 5 years.
Wow. Which is super impressive. And I'm like, you know
Thank
what?
you.
Maybe this is the turning point for me. Maybe I'm going to try a little bit of that. At least a little bit more of a healthier balance with like for me it's like it's YouTube for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of it I think is it's like that's how Justin and I spend time together is we like watch things
Yeah.
together. But it's like more often it can be like, okay, well, maybe if he wants to like play a video game instead, like we just kind of don't think about it too much. We're just like, okay, we're going to sit down
Yeah.
and just like watch, our little shows on YouTube like forever now. But it's like, well, we
Yeah.
can do that sometimes, but maybe sometimes we could also do something else and like I can read while we do, whatever else. So
Yeah.
yeah, like I think that's like yeah, I'm like, okay, maybe now, maybe this is the turning point for me. I could like figure out how to balance a little bit more books into my life because I want to, and I'm like, I'm ready to like make better choices. Yeah, and I have to ask. I'm like backtracking a little bit here, but I'm very curious. It's like related, but not really. What is your drink of choice at your when you go out and like have maybe a little beverage and like read a book like at a cafe or a bar, like depending on the establishment? What is your drink of choice for reading?
If I'm at a coffee shop, okay, my like the honest answer is whatever I'm like in the mood for, and my mood
Mm.
changes like really
Oh, okay.
drastically.
Sure.
But and like often I like go to a coffee shop, and it's like, oh, I'm gonna have like my normal coffee that I always get, like even if I'm not reading a book, like I'll just
Yeah.
get like the coffee I was gonna drink anyways. Um, but like a really good vibe. There's a place in Bellingham that has really good hot chocolate, and
Oh,
it's
wow.
so good. And I don't go there like super often to get hot chocolate because like I don't know, it's like when do you have time to just like leisurely drink a cup of hot
Right.
chocolate? Like,
Yeah.
it's few and far between. Also they're not open on Sundays, so it's like I can't even do it
Oh,
on Sundays. So it's like
yeah. Yeah.
anyways. But a really good vibe, especially in the winter in Bellingham, is going to that place, getting hot chocolate and reading because it feels like it's a special like treat drink. It's like it's hot chocolate.
Yeah. I totally get that. Yeah.
And like the whipped cream, anyways.
Oh my goodness.
Um, so that like kind of came to mind. And then the other thing that I love doing is like just again being such a manic pixie dream girl. And there's this like specific bar that I go to and read at like a lot. And there's this like it's like a whiskey cocktail, but it like comes in like a whiskey glass, and it looks very like it looks
Oh.
like something like an old man would order.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, oh, I'm so sophisticated. Like I'm just drinking my little whiskey drink and like
Yeah.
reading my book at this bar.
Yeah, you're like, how can I continue being the main character as much as possible?
Exactly. Which I do genuinely like that drink. I don't just order it for the
Uh-huh.
aesthetics,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it does make me feel very main character.
Uh-huh.
So that's my answer to that.
Cute. Okay. Okay, good.
Um, but yeah, you said okay. So I did want to share how many books I've read so far this year. Um, because I'm honestly impressed with myself, and part of it is because yeah, I like started a new job at the beginning of the year that has hour-long lunch breaks, and so I read a ton on my lunch. But also, Abe has gone out of town twice for like extended periods of time, and I don't know what to do with myself when he's gone. So
Yeah.
I just read. Um, but yeah, so far this year I've read 28 books.
Wow. Oh my gosh. That's so many. And
Yeah.
like, do you kind of have like an average size of book? Or do you read a lot of shorter ones? Like, or
Yeah,
is
there's
it,
definitely some shorter ones. I don't have
yeah.
the average. So I keep track of my reading in a spreadsheet and it does calculate a lot of things. But average page number is not one. I usually have it do the sum of I
Mm.
can actually make it figure out the average. Okay, my average page length of book is 346 pages.
Okay. And I actually don't know. I have to like open up a book here to see how many pages. Okay. I see. I can like estimate that in my brain. That's like not a
Yeah.
huge book. Like on
Yeah, not
average.
huge,
Yeah.
not huge. Also, definitely not like kids' books.
Yes,
So
yeah.
like, you know.
Yeah. That's so
Um,
impressive. Oh my gosh. So, do you feel like are you retaining the information from books you read? Like do you remember a lot of them or do you feel like that you read so much that it all starts to like blend together?
yeah, so in 2020, which we all know was a dark year,
Yeah.
I read 130 something books. Like it was absolutely ridiculous. Um, and I think reading that much, like there's no way to like retain it all, right? Like
Uh-huh.
if I look
Yeah.
back at like the 132 books that I read that year, like a lot of it I don't remember, and that's because I was literally reading back to back to back, like days and days on end, because it was like, what else do we do? You
Yeah.
know?
And
Um,
it's healthier than a lot of other things you could have been doing.
right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely don't think like I retained everything. I think the last couple of years since then, like 2021, I read, I think like 60 books or something. And then 2022, I literally read 19.
Oh
This
wow.
year so far, 28. So, like I've definitely like not gotten back to that scale. And I think this is like a pretty, I'm doing like about a book a week or like maybe a little bit like more.
Okay.
So it's like not too bad. There are definitely some that are forgettable,
Mm.
but like ones that aren't forgettable, like good books, like stick with you no matter
Yeah.
how fast you read them, I
Sure.
think.
Yeah. How much time do you give yourself any time between books to like, ruminate? Is that the right use of that word? To kind of
Yeah,
like or do you kind of just like pick up another book immediately and start reading it?
it really depends on the book.
Oh,
So
okay.
usually if it's something that I am gonna be thinking about, um sometimes I do have to take like a little bit of a break and like give myself a couple of days before I pick something else up. Um, One that comes to mind that I read this year was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, I think. Um, that one, highly recommend it, especially to you. I think you would like it. But that one, when I finished it, I was like, okay, I need 3 to 5 business days before I like can do
Yeah.
anything else. Um,
Yeah.
so that one I like had to take a minute. But other ones it's like, oh, okay, if I didn't really like it or if it was like kind of like bland or whatever, it's like, okay, like yeah, I can just move on to the next thing.
Mm.
I think the other thing I do is I don't read the same type of book like one after the other. Like I switch it up like constantly. Like if I just
Yeah.
finished like a sci-fi book, like the next book I'm reading is like a poetry collection.
Sure. Yeah,
Or
that's
like
another thing that I was really curious about that I'm sure is you have as a question for both of us too is like
yeah.
what like do you prefer a genre? Like what is your, like average, amount of each genre that you read, like how like
Mhm.
and all those types of things.
Yeah. Um I think like I really read a pretty even mix of everything. Like I am pretty open to picking up any book and my tastes are pretty like widespread. What about you? Do you feel like you read like you tend to read the same type of book?
I have, of course, a mix of books, and I think, like, probably most people are reading mostly fiction. Like, I feel like that's just the most popular type of book, is
Mm.
all types of fiction, whether it's, like, sci-fi or, like, romance fiction or, like, fantasy fiction, like, just like fiction books I feel like are like
Mm-hmm.
broadly. And so of course I do tend to read fiction. In college I started getting really into nonfiction of a
Mm-hmm.
wide variety. And so like memoir type stuff and personal essays and stuff like that I started to get really into, and even some true crime and stuff like that. Um and so because I don't read as frequently, I think that like when I pick books, it tends to be a little bit more like I do like think about the genre more, I guess. Um and so
Yeah.
yeah, like recently in life I think I've been more like in the 4 books that I've read this year, if I hold them up, I have I have 3, I guess they all count as nonfiction, and 1 fiction. So like
Okay.
that's like this year, yeah, so it tends to be more like that, and then a lot less. I do read poetry on occasion, but like less than other types of
Mm-hmm.
literature. I enjoy poetry, but it's just, it's just not like as much in my like on my bookshelf as other types of books.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess that's like a broad answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just looking through my little list, and I think I've read 4 nonfiction books out of 28, and then 3 poetry collections, and then the rest have been various forms of fiction.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, like I definitely read less nonfiction than I do fiction, but I do read a decent amount of nonfiction,
Mhm.
and a decent amount of poetry. Um, but yeah, I definitely think it's more fun to like switch it up, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. So,
And I do find, yeah, like if I read the same type of, like if I read 2 romance books in a row, it's like, oh, I can never
yeah.
read romance again,
Yeah.
because I
In
get so
high
bored.
school, I read like literally every Sarah Dessen book that was out at that time, like at the same time. And so
Oh my
they
god.
all just like blend together. I actually own one
Yeah.
that when I was in high school, I had a favorite and I still own it because it was like, when you're at that time. Do you know what I'm
Yeah.
talking about? Do you remember the Sarah Dessen books?
Yes, it was like
Yeah.
the I don't even know what it was called, but it was like the one with the bicycle on the cover.
Oh, I think I might know.
Yeah.
My favorite
Anyways.
was called Keeping the Moon. And I remember it was called
Aw.
that. Yeah. And it was like a girl, because she was like a little alternative girl. And, she had like a
Aw.
little lip piercing, and she had like her hair dyed black. And
Okay.
because they're all like, little coming of age teenage girl stories, basically.
Yeah.
And she like made friends with these like older girls that like gave her a little makeover, and it like mentioned Rush in the book, which is like one of the reasons why I liked it, because
Aw.
it had like music stuff in it and stuff like that, so it was all just like specific things that I like enjoyed, when I was younger, and like now. And so that one was my favorite one. But yeah, when you read all
That's really
like the
cute.
same book at the same like close together, it just all kind of ends up blending together.
Okay, I just Googled it, and the
Uh-huh.
main character in that is named Nicole.
In my favorite one.
Yeah, in Keeping the Moon.
Oh my god, I don't
Her
even know
like
if I remember
first
that.
name is, yeah,
Yeah,
her like the main
that's
character
really
is named
funny.
Nicole.
That could have been another reason why I liked it, because it
Yeah,
was very like, how many things in this book are going to be specific to my lived experience.
right? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, this makes me want to read it. Damn.
I mean, I own it. If you
Anyways.
want to borrow it, totally. It would probably take you like 3 days to read. It's like not a big book or anything, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like a young adult book, so
That's
it's,
cute.
yeah.
I love going back to like some of those. Do you ever, okay, this is another question. Are you a rereader? Do you reread things?
I have reread books, but
Mm-hmm.
very, very rarely. Like I've only reread, like I can only think of one right now.
Mm.
So very, very rarely, and part of it is because I, especially for the last half of my life approximately, I've read a lot less. And so it's like
Mm.
when I do have time to read or when I make time to read, I want it to be something new. Like I don't want to,
Yeah.
essentially like waste time going back and reading something I've already read when there's so many other books that I want to read. Do you
Yeah.
ever reread books?
I do. I feel like I'm very similar to you. Like
Mm-hmm.
9 times out of 10, like I'm gonna choose to read something that I haven't read. Like this shelf right here behind me, this whole shelf is books that I own that I haven't read yet.
Oh wow, yeah.
Um, and so especially when I like look at that and I'm like, oh, like here's probably 60 books that I could
Yeah.
choose to read
Yeah,
that I have
listener,
not read
it's a
yet.
big shelf. It's a lot of
Yeah,
books.
yeah.
It's way more,
Um,
like I have a lot too, but yeah.
yeah.
Probably most of my bookshelf I haven't read at this point in my
Um,
life.
yeah, but there
Yeah.
are a few books that I will pick back up. The thing I haven't reread anything this year. So like this year all of those 28 books are new read.
Mm.
But in 2022, actually it might have been 2021, I reread Killing Yourself to Live by
Oh,
Chuck.
yeah. I just bought
Who
the 90s.
Oh
I just bought that. So I'm like, okay, that's on my list now. I need to read that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I have reread that once. And it was like a really healing reread. I don't know, like that sounds so dramatic. But I reread it like at a really
Yeah.
like pivotal moment, I think, and
Sure.
I like really needed to reread it at that moment. And it like gave me a lot of like inspiration about what I wanted to write about and how I wanted to write it and all of these things. And so yeah, that's one that I could see myself rereading again. Probably not for a while, but at
Yeah.
some point.
Honestly, I would reread it too. That was the first one that I
Yeah.
read.
Yeah, it was the first one I read too, so I feel like
Yeah.
rereading it after I already knew about Chuck more
Mhm.
and like what an impact he's had on me and
Yeah.
all of
Yeah,
that
cuz you've read
was big.
all of his books? Have you read all of
All of
his?
his books.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I've only read a few, but like totally I would read more. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's one that I've reread. I would really like to go back, I think, and reread some of the books that were really influential to me when I was a bit younger.
Mm.
Like The Perks of Being a Wallflower comes to
Oh,
mind.
yeah. Yeah.
Looking for Alaska, honestly, I would reread.
Wait,
Um,
who's the author of that?
John Green.
I have never read a John Green book. I
Wow,
might
okay.
I might still have the Fault in Our Stars. That was the really big
Oh,
one. I like borrowed
yeah.
that from a high school friend because she was like, "Yeah, you can borrow it and read it. Like it's good. You should read it." And I literally never did. And
Oh,
there's no
wow.
like real reason why I haven't. I just haven't.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
don't think it's bad. Like, I'm not a hater. I
Mhm.
don't think it's like the best thing I've ever read or anything.
Uh-huh.
Looking for Alaska was more influential on me when I
Mm.
was 15 than The Fault in Our Stars, but I haven't read it since, so I don't know.
Mm.
I don't know if it holds up.
Yeah.
Um, can't say. I will say I read John Green's most recent book, which is like a nonfiction, like memoir-y type thing.
Oh, okay.
And it was like so moving. It was
Wow.
like the one of the best books I read last year, and it made me cry like 5 times,
Oh my gosh. Okay.
like genuinely.
Yeah.
So I don't know, much to think about.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'm like looking at my shelf. I'm like, what else would I reread? I don't think there's a lot that I would reread. Um, Honestly, nonfiction is far more likely to have me reread it
Oh, okay.
just because there's like knowledge in there or like specific like quotes or something that I might
Mhm.
want,
Mhm.
or like real events. I don't know. And then poetry I do reread more frequently as well, but it's more like when I read a poetry book, I flag the pages or like mark them in some way of like the poems that I want to come back to. And then oftentimes I'll just go and like look at that one poem or something. So that's kind of my rereading, but I don't do
Yeah.
it very often.
Okay. Yeah. Do you like I don't know what time we want to or like when we want to like pivot to talking about specifically the books that we read this year.
Yeah.
But do you are you like a supporter of writing in your books or are you like this book has to be clean?
Um for the most part, I'm a write in your book, dog ear the page, whatever you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly because my like little library is my library, and I am usually never thinking about like, oh, I'm gonna like have to give this book away at some point, or I'm
Mm.
gonna like somebody else is gonna like read this and be like annoyed by it or whatever. It's like, oh no, these are my books that are gonna live on my shelves, and like, you know. Also, I find it like actually does enhance my reading experience to like write stuff down,
Yeah.
or like flag the pages or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Do some underlining. So usually I'm all for it. If I know for sure that I'm gonna like give it to somebody else to read, then I'll hold back a little bit. Like I might still underline a couple things, but I'm not gonna like make it too crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um but yeah, I'm never worried about like cracking the spine or
Mm.
like I'm never worried about it like not being able to be like sold or something. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Yeah, that's like what books are for. In
exactly.
college I did become a big like writing and underlining and circling books person, but
Yeah.
it's always in pencil. I like still feel weird about using a pen for
Oh,
whatever
I'm a
reason. I
pencil girly
I always
all the
do
way. Yeah.
pencil. Yeah.
Agree.
Yeah.
Big agree.
As a matter of fact, I would like to write in my books more.
Yeah.
I just like don't always have a pencil next to me or whatever,
Yeah.
but sometimes I'm reading a book and I'm like I have to have a pencil. Like I have to underline this, like I have to like write a note that I'm thinking right now. And some books,
Exactly.
elicit more of a response than others, so you're like yeah.
Yeah. I do
Yeah.
also I read a lot on like I have a Kindle, like an
Oh,
actual
yeah.
Kindle that I like read on.
Mhm.
And so in that obviously you can't.
You
Actually, I
can
think there is a
highlight.
way, but it's like
I highlight
not.
on my Kindle app. I've been reading the
Mm.
White Album
Mm.
for a long time now, like literally years, because I am so inconsistent with the Kindle app. It's like I forget I have it on my phone. And
Yeah,
also
yeah.
it's such like a hard, not hard. Um
Heavy maybe.
Joan Didion's vocabulary is very impressive.
Yeah,
And it's like
I get
doing a
that. Yeah.
workout for your brain. It's like doing a really healthy
Yeah,
workout. So I don't read it all the time, but I absolutely am obsessed with her writing, and I adore
yeah.
her and her writing. But you can highlight. I do highlight very often when I'm like reading in my Kindle app.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, hey, maybe I need to figure that out. But also, I wouldn't know how to go back and like find it, I guess.
Oh. I mean, I guess yeah.
Anyways,
Yeah.
that's my own
Yeah.
technological problem.
Sure.
Also, though, I share my Kindle, like my Kindle, the actual like technology piece is mine, but like the account with like all the books in
Oh.
it, I share with my mom and my grandma.
Mm.
Um, so I don't know if that would be like annoying to them if I like to. Anyways,
Yeah.
anyways, I also read a lot of books from the library, and I also read like do a lot of audiobooks.
Oh yeah.
So
I feel like I might have to do audiobooks for the first time ever because my commute to work is longer now. And I have a
yeah,
podcast, but when I run out of that like when I catch up, I don't know what to do. So I'm like, wow, maybe I'll have to do audiobook. But those are hard for me because I have such a hard time being engaged with words, with like someone talking. And so I'm like,
yeah,
I'm not going to retain anything. It's like hard for me to pay attention. But I've been doing okay with a podcast. I'm like, okay, well, maybe just the time it takes to go to and from work, like maybe I can stay engaged. But we'll see. I've never
yeah,
even tried. So,
yeah.
yeah.
My recommendation is, and this is what I do, is one, I get them from the library because it's free.
Oh.
Love that. And then two, I there are specific types of books that I will listen to on audiobook and some that I won't, because you have to like think about, yeah, I don't know, I guess I like the same problem that you're talking about, where it's like, oh, it's going to be hard to be engaged with this as just an audiobook
Mm-hmm.
if it's like a bit too dry, or if there's like too many names to keep track of, or too many
Oh,
like,
yeah.
if it's too complicated, you can't do it on audiobook because you can't go back and like reread stuff.
Yeah.
Or you can, but it's like very
Yeah.
difficult.
Yeah, how do you decide what you want to read on a Kindle or own physically or do audiobook? Like how do you decide which one of those you want to do?
Um, audiobooks, I almost exclusively do like either like romance books or like little cute like mysteries that like
Mm.
aren't too deep,
Mm-hmm.
or like different like things that aren't too complicated, like maybe a memoir, because it's usually like just the author like telling a story, about their
Yeah.
life. You
Mm-hmm.
already like maybe know some of the details for, or yeah, things like that. I almost never do poetry on audiobook because I feel like you have to see it.
Mm-hmm.
I almost never do like fantasy or like sci-fi because I feel like there's so many like names and things that you have to keep track of that I'm like, no. Um, yeah, that's kind of how I do that.
Okay. Is there ever a book that you do audio or Kindle and then you're like, I have to have this physically, and then you get it physically?
Yeah, there's been a couple. Mostly just if it's one that I know I might want to reread, or like know that is like important to go back to or something like that. Like if it's on audiobook, it's from the library usually, and so like I have to give it back. So I'll be like, "Oh, this is a book that I want to have forever." So I'll go out and get it. Or if it's on my Kindle, that means my mom or my grandma bought it. And so I don't usually choose if I read it on Kindle. It just means
Mm.
that before I bought it physically, my mom or my grandma bought it on Kindle to read. And so it's like, well, I'm not gonna like also spend money on it,
Yeah, yeah.
and buy it physically. But sometimes if it's like, oh, this is a book that is like really like, I need to be highlighting or something,
Yeah.
then I'll do that. But that hasn't really happened
Mm.
too often.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, tell me the books you read this year.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll just go over all four that I read because it's only four.
Yeah.
So two of them are temple Satanism related,
Okay.
and then two of them are not.
Okay.
So the ones that aren't, I read, it was Todd Duncan, who you might remember from Pacific University, um,
Mm-hmm.
who's very close with Justin. Is we've asked him to officiate our wedding. And
Yeah.
so he had this book and he wanted us to read it. And it, yeah. And it's called What is Marriage For by E.J. Graff.
Okay.
And the like subtitle is the strange social history of our most intimate institution. And what's not obvious about it before you read it, even though it has like this rainbow spine that you can see, what's not obvious about it before you read it is that it is a lesbian author, and a lot of the book, like every chapter, basically wraps around every single topic back to arguing that gay marriage is okay, basically, which I do not have an issue with. I just thought it was interesting that it's like not obvious when you like look at the book or pick it up that
Mm.
like a lot of it is like that, but most of the book is really super super interesting, and it is like a history of marriage, and it goes over it has different like parts. There's like part 1, part 2, 3, and it's money, sex, babies, kin, order, and heart. So these are like all the like reasons you would marry someone, basically. And then
Mm-hmm.
it talks about like Western history specifically, like the history of why people got married and what marriage meant and how you got married, and all those kinds of things. And I like stuff like this. I love informative literature, like nonfiction that's like educational, but it doesn't
Yeah.
read too much like a textbook, like it's interesting, and I think it's pretty engaging. I thought it was super interesting. I'm glad that I read it. It didn't make me think differently about why I want to get married per se. Like I feel like
Yeah.
I feel like Justin and I are like in a good spot for like why we want to get married. Um
Yeah.
and all those types of things. But it was super interesting, and I think, and I agree with him. I'm like, yeah, if I, if someone asked me to like officiate their wedding, I'd be like, hey, maybe you should read this book. Like, I get it. I thought it was super
Yeah.
cool. And so yeah, I guess that's like all about that.
Yeah.
But
No,
yeah,
that's good. I like that. I think
yeah,
it's very sweet that, he wanted to like give you something to think about, I guess, before
Right?
you,
Yeah.
before he officiates your wedding. And I think that means that he, like, really doesn't take it, like, lightly that you asked him, and he wants to,
Yeah.
like, really be a part of it in, like, a meaningful way. And yeah, I think that's really sweet.
Yeah,
And that's
I
a
thought it was
cool
really
book.
sweet too. Yeah, and it's a super cool book. Yeah, yeah, because
Yeah.
I wasn't there when Justin talked with them about it and asked him, but they ended up having like a whole conversation about marriage related stuff, and so yeah,
Hmm.
I thought it was really sweet. Um,
Very
that he did that.
nice.
Yeah. And the second book that I finished this year is White Noise, and is his name pronounced Don DeLeo, I think. I'm actually not sure because it's
Okay.
DELILLO. So if it's pronounced kind of like Spanish, it's Don DeLeo. Um and it is they just released, I think it's released. They just made a movie,
Mm.
which I like didn't know, which is so funny because this book was published in, let me find it real quick because it's like right here. This book was published in 1984. Looks like the first publishing date.
Mm.
So it's weird that like I happened to read this book when they made a movie. Um
Yeah.
but this I bought it. Okay, so I got this book because we did like a Powell's date, I think, which Justin and I do sometimes. And
Hmm.
I saw a quote on Tumblr from this book.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, like I don't remember what it was. I know that I like underlined it in here when I found it or whatever, but I saw a quote and it intrigued me, and so I put this on, like, I have like a list of books on my phone that I like want to buy and read, maybe, that like people recommend me or that I, see quotes from on Tumblr, which like
Hmm.
hasn't really happened before, but I did that. So I found it used and I was like, sure, it's like less than $10 used, I'll buy it. And it's in fantastic condition for being so inexpensive, actually. And I read it mostly when I was in the hospital in December with my
Yeah.
father, and then I finished it in January. And I did not know when I started reading it that a big, like, overarching theme of the whole book is death related and like fear of death and a lot of stuff that has to
Mm.
do with death. There's not a lot of like actual death in the book really, but there's a lot of
Hmm.
like people talking about it and thinking about it and a lot of stuff revolving around it. And I thought it was written, okay, I have to find my review of this because I like, so this is what I wrote on Goodreads. So I wrote, when I
Hmm.
started reading this book, I thought there's no way people talk like this, even or especially in the 80s. Because I started reading this and I'm like, the people don't talk like this. It's written like a fancy writer would write. Like, this is
Hmm.
like, it sounds kind of pretentious. In the beginning, I thought it was written a little unnecessarily pretentiously, but after I got past the writing style, I became like super super immersed in the story. So it's, I don't
Hmm.
know, it was like just kind of a weird thing in the beginning because I'm like, this does not flow like natural human language in
Hmm.
2022. But once you like kind of get, you're like, okay, this is just how this world is, then it's very like immersive. It's written actually very well, and I became, you become like really uh I wrote the word enthralled with each character and all their storylines
Hmm.
because there's different
Hmm.
storylines happening. Um, and only after reading this, and so this is weird to me, after reading this book, I noticed, I like, because it has quotes all over it, from like, publications and stuff. After reading it, I realized that like a couple of them use the word humorous in their quote about the book. And I don't know if I missed something, but I did not think this book was funny at all. Any part of it. None of it. And
Wow.
I'm like, it was stressful. I wrote it was stressful at times, unnerving and deliberative, but not funny. But I enjoyed it. So it's like, yeah, I thought, and I wrote actually this book, maybe not in the beginning, especially. I'm like flipping through and I'm not seeing any, but I actually did a lot of like underlining and bracketing, and
Yeah.
at the end of a lot of chapters, I haven't really done this like before, but at the end of a lot of chapters, actually wrote like multiple notes like in the space on the page after the end of
Oh,
every chapter. I
interesting.
had so many thoughts that I was just like, I have to write
Wow.
these in here. So it made me think a lot. I really enjoyed it, but it was not funny. I don't understand that. I'm like, did I miss
Wow.
something? Like, this is not amusing to me. So that is
Interesting.
that is it was good.
Hmm.
I would recommend it. I think it was
Okay.
good. Um, yeah. In the movie, I think the dad, the main character guy, is played by the Kylo Ren guy. I think.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And then the two Satanism related books that I read. The first one is called The Devil's Tome by Shiva Honey, and it is a book about ritual,
Okay.
specifically non-theistic satanic ritual, because that's something that before I even, it's actually part of something that led me to temple satanism recently, is I was very
Hmm.
interested in the concept of ritual and the concept of ceremony and stuff like that. um and which I've still been very interested in and still looking to read more about. And so she talks a little bit about just the concept of ritual here, and specifically like a non-superstitious ritual, and how normal the concept of ritual is, and how we don't realize that we have a lot of like ritualistic practices that are incredibly normalized in society. Like
Hmm.
birthdays are rituals, wedding ceremonies are rituals, stuff like that. It's like
Hmm.
something that marks an occasion with some sort of significance, you know. It has like certain things that you follow, you know, to mark the event, and a certain, you know, like steps and things that you do. And you know, for like some specific reason. And
Hmm.
I've also been a little bit interested, but haven't looked too into like the concept of like meditation and stuff, like just for myself, because I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I feel like I want to get more into like messing with my brain, like not in a superstitious way, but just like doing things to help, you know, to like help my brain basically, and things that are
Yeah.
like, you know, self-care related and stuff like that, especially around this time in my life where I'm experiencing a lot of trauma, I guess, is like the most blatant way
Yeah.
to put it. And so, you know, just like trying to help my brain, you know, process things just in everyday life. And so I bought The
Yeah.
Devil's Tome because it was like very highly regarded in the non-theistic like literature. Like you can get it on the Satanic Temple's website and stuff. And she goes into a little bit of detail about like what is a ritual, like what are rituals for, you know, like different things that you can use rituals for, stuff like that. And I actually wish that she would have went into more detail about that in her little like introduction when she goes, when she talks about that, because she, it feels like just an intro
Mm-hmm.
to the concept, and I'm like, say more. I want to read more about what you have to say about
Interesting.
that. Yeah, and she like did research and stuff and cites her sources and whatnot. And
I feel like
then
we should have a podcast episode where we just like deep dive into some of
yes,
that. Yeah.
which we totally can. So I'll try not to like go too much into detail right now. I'll just like kind of talk a
Okay,
little
yeah.
bit more about like, you know,
Yeah.
the concept of these two books, but I won't like go too into detail. But
Yeah.
basically the rest of this just outlines different rituals and different non-theistic, non-superstitious like satanic rituals, and I thought it was really interesting. I haven't done any of them yet, but I'm very interested. And it's an adorable little book. You can see
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like all black, and it's really small, and it has like pretty gold, like gold
Yeah.
cover design.
I love a pretty book. Like that
Yes, yeah.
does a lot for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other one that I read is, it's the thickest book that I read. It's like a decently sized book. It's not huge. Um,
Mhm.
but it's called Compassionate Satanism: An Introduction to Modern Satanic Practice by Lilith Starr. And this book I thought was very good. It's actually the second of a related book that I've read. The first satanic book that I read was by a, I don't remember what it's called right now. I think it's called Speak of the Devil, and it's by a like non-affiliated, like non-Satanist, like religious studies professor, and that was
Mhm.
really good. And this one is like written by a Satanist. She founded the Seattle, like the Washington congregation,
Mhm.
And I thought it was really good, and it just, goes into detail about what this like new modern sect of Satanism basically is about, and where it came from, and what it means, and what their tenets mean, and all that stuff. And then in the end, it has personal like interviews with people who identify with this brand of Satanism, and it was really interesting. And this one, I need to go back through because I underlined things and stuff, but I want to go back through and like bookmark a bunch of stuff, so we can
Mhm.
yeah, like maybe like have a whole podcast where we talk about it because it's super interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been trying to go because right now I have more books too that I want to read that are related to
Yeah.
Satanism. And so I've been trying to like go back and forth. Like read a Satanism book, read a book that's not. Like, like like space it out a little
Yeah.
bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so that took like a little bit of time, but those are the 4 books that I read this year. I don't know if you what you were thinking, if you just want to talk about like your 4 favorites from this year or whatever list of favorites that you had, or like anything specific
Yeah.
that you want to say about books from this
I am
year.
certainly not going to go through every book that I read
Yeah.
this year because that would be too much.
Yeah.
But I did want to just like highlight some of the like not necessarily my like 4 favorites, but like maybe just some of the ones that stood out, whether
Sure.
that's because they were my favorite or because I finally read a very notable title or like whatever.
Oh yeah,
So
totally.
yeah, so I read the first one I wanted to talk about is the second book I read this year. I finished it on January 10th of this year, and it's the longest book I've read so far this year, and it was 600 pages.
Oh wow.
And it was Fairy Tale by Stephen King, which is his
Oh.
most recent book. And I'm an off and on Stephen King fan, but this one was actually good. And I was like, oh, Stephen King is like kind of back, or he's like, he's
Okay.
doing something I can appreciate.
Yeah.
And he writes such long books, and so I was nervous to read
Uh-huh.
a 600-page like monster
Yeah.
on the second book of the year, but it was good, so I recommend that one.
Okay.
Because you already talked about Joan Didion, I just wanted to mention that I read The Year of Magical Thinking in also January.
Which I haven't read yet, but I know
Yeah,
of it. Yeah.
and I really liked it. That was the first book by Joan Didion that I had ever like read. I'd read pieces
Mm.
of things here and there, but that was the first one like I actually read. Um, and yeah, I recommend it to you because you like Joan Didion already, but I would say maybe give it a little while before you read that one
Yeah.
specifically. I don't know if you know what it's about, but maybe just give it some time.
I think I do. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I do. Cuz I've looked into a lot of her books, so I think
Yeah.
I do know what it's
Yeah.
about. Yeah.
And it was really good, but it was hard to read
Mhm.
for me, and so I would only imagine that it would be really hard
Yeah.
to read. Anyways, um the
Yeah, her
other
writing is
notable,
so gorgeous.
yeah.
I'm obsessed with the way
Yeah.
she writes. Yeah.
Yes. It was very good.
Yeah.
Um the first like 5 out of 5 star book that I read this year was, I already mentioned it, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which I read in
Mm.
March.
Mhm. I really
Um
want to ask, and you can say like 2 words to answer this. We could like go over it, more later. But like, what makes a 5-star book for you? Because I'm like, I want to rate them all 5 stars. They were all, decent. Like, they were all good. But it's like, what
yeah,
makes like, how does it become a 5-star book for you?
one, it has to be well written, like
Mm-hmm.
just the language. I have to, because I find with a lot of books I stumble a little bit with like the writing style. It doesn't necessarily mean it was like badly written, just
Mm-hmm.
like there is a level to which I'm like, oh, this is like a beautifully written book.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like step one. Step two is that it has to make me think about something besides just the like plot of the book,
Okay. Okay.
or like the stuff that's on the page. Like if I can think about like other stuff that's not on the page while I'm reading it, then that means that the author's like actually doing something to like evoke something. And then three, I have to still be thinking about it like, days later or something.
Okay.
Like if it if it is gonna like stick with me, if it makes me like emotional. Like not every book that makes me cry is a 5 out of 5, but that's usually like an indicator, you know. If it can make me cry, that's like pretty hard to do. When I'm reading a book, so like that, or make me like genuinely mad or genuinely like, you know, something like that. So if it evokes like some kind of like real emotion in me, I'm thinking about it days later, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just curious.
So yeah, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, highly recommend. It's so good. Best book
fiction?
of the year so far. It's fiction.
Okay.
Yeah. I think you would like it a lot.
Sure. Yeah.
And then the other one I wanted to talk about was I finally this month, I finished it on May 3rd. I read 1984 for the first time.
Oh my gosh. You know what? I think I've read that book twice because I read it in high school and then I think I read it in college too. Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was I just know that if I was not ever asked to read it in high school. We read Animal Farm, I think.
We
but
didn't,
not
and I read that of my own like volition last year, and I enjoyed it. Yeah.
And I can just tell, which is the case with a lot of classics. And it's I do try to go back and read classics like decently often. It's hard though because my brain doesn't want to work hard, but
yeah.
It's good though because I often find that I'm like, oh, this is like a really like powerful book. Like, of course, it's a classic.
Yeah.
Anyways, 1984. I can tell if I had read it when I was younger, I would have been like, what's the point? I don't care. This is boring. I don't like it. But reading it now as like an adult, I was like, oh, this is a really good book and it's really like interesting and it has a lot of like good political commentary.
Yeah, thought provoking.
Like, oh, this was written, you know, like I don't know, 60 years ago, 70 years ago now at this point. And it's still just like so haunting.
Yeah.
That it was written that long ago and it's just like you read it in 2023 and you're like, okay.
I had the same exact thoughts when I read Animal Farm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyways, that was like a very notable book for me. I actually didn't give it 5 stars, but I did give it 4.
Okay.
Because I really liked it. But it was not like, I don't know. But I did like it a lot. Oh, and I think the worst book I read so far.
Oh no.
Is called A Court of Thorns and Roses, and I also read that in May.
I've heard of that. Wait.
Yeah, it's like it's so popular.
Yeah.
It's so popular. It's like a fantasy book. It's like the first one in a series. My sister was the one who like highly recommended it to me.
Oh no.
I will say if you are like into Twilight, you would be into this.
Is it a Game of Thrones related somehow, or does it just happen to kind of sound like maybe it could be?
It's a similar vibe though.
Yeah.
But it's like it has like fairies and like it's like a fantasy.
So I would probably like love that. You know, in high school I was reading stuff like that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I think it's like it is for like people in high school who want like a fun like book to read that had, you know, I didn't think it was like bad to be clear. Like I'm not like hating on it. Just of the books that I read, I usually choose books that aren't like that. And so in comparison, that one was the worst one.
Okay.
But I think I am still going to read the sequel because my sister really wants me to.
Oh, okay.
She says the second one is way better, so I don't know.
Okay.
But yeah, that was the worst book I read this year so far. And that's kind of my book update. That's kind of what I've been reading.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What are you currently reading right now?
I just started. I'm about like 20 pages, 30 pages in to a memoir, or I guess it's sort of a memoir, called Burning Questions by Margaret Atwood, who wrote The Handmaid's Tale.
Oh, which I still have not read, actually. I have not read The Handmaid's Tale.
You should read it.
Margaret Atwood
is 1984.
Yeah. Is she the one that's like kind of controversial? There are people who really don't like her, I think.
Oh, I don't think so.
Yeah. I mean, there's probably that with
Maybe,
every author
maybe.
ever, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I've read a lot of Margaret Atwood's novels. I've
Mm.
never really read much of her, like, this isn't like her memoir. It's like from 2004 to 2021, like,
Mm.
memoir-y stuff.
Okay.
Because I guess she's written like two other memoirs from like other periods of her life. She's like 80 something at this
Oh,
point.
wow.
So,
Yeah, wow.
um, anyways, but I respect her so much, and I think she's like a genius. Like, her novels are so, like, I don't know, I guess exactly the same feeling that we were talking about with George Orwell. Like, you read it in 2023 and you're like, haha, I can't believe you wrote this 50 years ago.
Yeah.
um but a lot of her stuff I've really, like, been really fascinated by. So, anyways, I just started it. I don't really know exactly what the vibe is going to be. I know she is going to talk about COVID in this, like, memoir
Mm.
book and her thoughts on it. And the reason I say that is because one of her, like, really famous books besides The Handmaid's Tale is called Oryx and Crake, and I read it a while ago, actually during the pandemic, and it was interesting to read at that time, let's just
Yeah,
say.
okay.
And she had written it, like, in the 90s or something, but it's basically about, like, a pandemic.
Oh, wow.
Um, and so I know she's going to talk about that in
Mhm.
this memoir. So,
Okay,
anyways,
yeah.
that's.
Yeah. I'm also reading just started like a memoir-ish book, and
Mm,
I think it's called Love That Story by
mm.
Jonathan Van Ness.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And because I'm like big fan of Queer Eye
Yeah,
and all those guys, all those people. And
nice.
so I saw it. I actually bought it at the same time that I bought the 90s because we were like at I don't usually go to like Barnes and Noble. I usually try to get books from like a more like local place or something like that, but we just
Yeah,
happened to be there recently, and I saw they were like having like a buy one get one deal, and I saw those books next to each other, and I was like, you know what, sure. So I got like the 90s and this book, and I was like, I'll just read this right now. And so I started
yeah,
it, and it's their second book, and I think it's kind of like a collection of personal essay type things. Like I don't think it's like one
yeah,
fluid, like they wrote a
yeah.
memoir book, which was their first one that I haven't read yet.
Hmm.
And then this one is like each chapter is like a different like anecdote, I think, type of a thing. I like stuff, memoir type stuff, and stuff like that, like real life, especially because a lot of them I had, compared to a lot of people that have written memoirs that I've had a very boring life. So I read
Hmm.
these things and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is real. Like, this actually happens to people. And it's one of those things where it's like
Yeah,
fact is weirder than fiction. So I find it very
yeah,
fascinating,
yeah,
Yeah. Just to like read
yeah,
other people's human experience. I feel like it builds empathy, even though I'm already like an incredibly
yeah.
empathetic person, it like,
Yeah, no,
yeah.
I feel that. If I had to choose a favorite genre of book, it might be memoirs,
Mm,
specifically like non-traditional types of memoirs,
yeah.
um, that are more like essay based, or more like, it's not just here's my life story, like,
Yeah.
front to back, but
Yeah,
like
parts
done
of
in more of
creative
like.
nonfiction. Like what I focused
Exactly,
on in college. Like there's a reason why I focused on it
exactly,
is I love
exactly.
that kind of literature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, good
Yeah.
luck with your reading endeavors. Maybe at the
Thank
end of
you.
the year we'll do a second half of the
Oh,
year
definitely. Like it's already this is
recap.
part 1. It's going in the title like we're having a part
Yeah.
2. If we have to have a part 2 and then a part 3, like we'll even do that. Like we'll split it up into thirds, but
Good.
yeah.
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 But yeah, I loved this. I loved reading. Like, getting back into reading in 2019 was like the best thing I ever did for my brain, truly.
Mhm.
And I love talking about books, and I love talking about books with people who also like to talk about books. So
Yeah,
this was
we filled
very,
up like a bunch of
very
times,
fun.
so we definitely have, like this
Good.
is going to be a little bit of a longer one, so we'll definitely,
Good.
yeah.
Well, happy reading, and
Yeah.
until next time, I love you.
I love you too.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye.